Okay, well, hey everyone. As Caroline said, my name is Lindsay, and I am one of the pastors over in Fort Worth at TCU, one of the Focus pastors. And I shared with you guys some over the summer how we were preparing to plant one of our ministries there. And I am here to report that it has been going so well. God has been blowing us away, and I am eager to continue to watch him capture the hearts and lives of students over there on that campus. Keep praying for us. It's been a really big blessing, and I appreciate all of y'all's encouragement and support in that. Last week, Mark kicked us off in our series here at Wiley Northeast that is based on the creation story. And I think he did a great job introducing the idea of creation being a story that is far better than we can ever imagine. Oftentimes, the question of how creation happened eclipses the theological question of why creation happened. And our hope is with this series that it'll pique your interest in the second question, why creation happened, and that you will discover that the creation story is the beginning of the greatest story ever told, and that our stories can be drawn up in it. So before we get started, today I'm going to be talking about when God created humanity and what it means to be human, what is all that about. And so talk with your neighbor for a second and answer the question, what is human nature? Okay, what were some of the things that y'all said? What is human nature? Conquering. Okay, nice. What else you got? Yeah? Complex, that is very true. Austin? Socializing, okay, nice. Creating, good. Anything else? Yeah? Choice. Yeah, we have a choice. That's good. What about one more? To be imperfect, yeah, that's definitely part of being human. So today, I thank y'all for sharing. Today I'm going to be preaching on the image of God. What is it? Who is it? What are the implications? These are all questions we're going to be answering. And in preparation for this sermon, I read a book called Being God's Image by theologian Carmen Imes. And she introduces the book by sharing the story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from the Narnia series. And I felt that it was very fitting. So for anyone who isn't familiar with this story, a super Cliff Note summed up version would be that there's these 4 children staying at a professor's house while they're on break from school. And in this house, they discover this dusty old wardrobe. And through a series of events, they all end up in this wardrobe, which then transports them to this other world called Narnia. And in this world, these children eventually become kings and queens, rulers of Narnia. And I am proposing that this is what happens when we align our stories with the story of Scripture. We step into the story of God's great love for the good world and the people he created, and we become his representatives there as kings and queens. The world gets so down on humanity sometimes, and it's true that there's a lot of pain and brokenness and sin involved, but I want to explore the possibility today that when God creates humanity and says that it's really good, he actually means it. So before we get into it too much, we're going to read the creation account together. And so we're going to read Genesis 1:1 through 2:3.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day and the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning on the first day. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate the water from the water. And God said, so God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. And God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry ground land, and he gathered the waters, and he called them seas. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, let the land produce vegetation and seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning on the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark the sacred times, the days and the years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light to the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning on the fourth day. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the sky across the vault of the sky. And God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing which the water teems and moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water of the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning on the fifth day. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move around the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move around the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, and the birds in the sky, and over the livestock, and all the wild animals, and over the creatures that move along the ground. And so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth and subdue it. And rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, and they will be yours for food. And all the beasts of the earth and the birds of the sky and the creatures that move along the ground and everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning on the sixth day. And thus the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array. But by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. And so on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. And then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done.
Thank you. That was awesome. So I'm sure many of us have read these first few pages in our Bible somewhere around January 1st or 2nd in an attempt to start the Bible in a year plan. And what used to be the beginning of a New Year's resolution has now become a story that is so rich and full of goodness to me. And I want to encourage you guys as we go through this series to really steep in this story and be asking yourself the question, what does this teach me about the heart of God? When God creates the birds, fish, and other animals, he says he makes them according to their kind. And after he creates them, he says that it is good. And then when he makes humanity, the scriptures say that God made them in his image, according to his kind. And then after looking at what he created, he said, it is very good. He then gives humanity responsibilities, filling the earth with more people, caring for creation, creating and maintaining the order and flourishing that God has already started. God appointed humans to exercise his rule over creation on his behalf, and that is a glorious task. And when I was studying the Hebrew in this passage, I found that the preposition in verse 26, when it says we're made in God's image, it could also be translated to being made as God's image, meaning that we are made as the image of God. And that really struck me because I think this shows just how big of a deal it is to be made as God's image or to be an image bearer. And you might be like, Lindsay, that's saying the same thing. And you might be right, but I think what strikes me here is how strong the language is. Saying that we're made in the image of God communicates that God is one of the ingredients. But when we read that we're made as the image of God, this communicates that God is the ingredient in who we are. The image of God isn't just something we bear, it's something we are. And that should inform every aspect of our lives. And the essence of who we are is the image of God. This does not mean that we're made as God. I'm not saying that. But I think a right look at this verse implies that being made as the image of God is very important. And I want to make sure we don't dilute what the author is trying to communicate here. And understanding this verse well might feel like splitting hairs a little bit, but it's also kind of like sending a rocket to space. Being even just a couple of degrees off can have really big consequences later on. And when I think we're off on the main principles of this creation story, it greatly affects our lives and our eschatology. And by eschatology, I mean what happens to us when all of this is over. And I'm not going to get too much into this, but what if a good look at the creation story leads us to believe that we're not going to just float into heaven as ghosts or souls? What if it actually means something to be human? What if God likes what he created so much, he doesn't want it all to just disappear one day? And this is more in the realm of what Rhett is going to be talking about in our church retreat. And so I want you guys to be thinking on that and come to retreat and find out what he has to say. But the main point that I want you guys to walk away with today is the image of God is central to human identity. We've already discussed before what we associate with being human, and they were great answers. I love that Kevin said conquer, and there were some other things that I think show that we're kind of on the right track with this. But I feel like I'm always finding myself saying, well, I made this mistake because I'm just human. But that's not really the essence of humanity. Even now after the fall, that's not who we are. So what does Scripture say it actually means to be human? In Genesis 1, it's really fun and interesting to dive into it, but days 1 and 3 are about creating spaces, and then days 4 and 6 are about filling those spaces. You see God create the star, moon, and sun, and they're created for the purpose of governing the day and the night. And then you see God create different creatures like birds and fish and the other animals on the land, and they're given the command to be fruitful and increase in number. And then we reach day 6, which is the climax of creation. God creates humans, and he gives them both a governing role, like the stars and the sun and the moon, and he gives them the command to be fruitful and increase in number, just like the command given to the animals. So you see what the author is doing here? It's good stuff. It's fun to study. Humanity is the crown of creation. And the good news is that's not something that you can just lose. In just the next chapter, in Genesis 3, sin enters the world. Humanity is now dealing with sin, but it's not like they take off the image of God and put on the image of brokenness, which sometimes I think we act that way. Instead, what happened is they lost the glory that's associated with living in alignment with who we are made to be. Sin is actually not being human. It's being something other than human. Rick Watts, who Caroline was talking about, he's a professor at Regent College in Canada. He often says that we need to become more human or to become truly human. In Colossians, we read that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Colossians 1:15-20 says, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." What gives Jesus this title, the image of the invisible God, is not the fact that he was God, but the fact that he was a person. His humanness is what qualified him as the image of the invisible God, not his deity. And hear me correctly, Jesus is God. I'm not saying otherwise. But this title, the image of God, is something that belongs to us, humanity, the crown of creation. And Jesus had that same title. The image of God is central to human identity. The incarnation shows us that putting on the physical stuff isn't all that bad after all. There is sadness and brokenness in the world, and I'm not denying that, but the fact that God would come to earth and put on flesh shows us that he believes that it is very good, to borrow some of the language in Genesis. Irenaeus, a Greek bishop and saint, says that the glory of God is man fully alive. So we've got to get back to being human again. And the way we ought to do that is to live in full alignment with who God made us to be, which is to be like Jesus. To be like Jesus is to become truly human, and there is so much goodness and freedom there. So when we encourage one another, we're living in alignment with who God made us to be, and it is glorious. I see this in Ashley Obregon when she's everyone's biggest fan. And when we truly see people and notice them and believe in them, we're living in alignment with who God has made us to be, and it is glorious. And I see this in Lindsay Berger when she sees and fills the needs of the people around her. Every person is worth paying attention to. When we are like Jesus and use power and authority to protect, love, and build others up, we are living in alignment with who God made us to be, and it is glorious. And I see this in our pastoral staff in all the ways that they serve us. But when we lie to each other or use people or care about ourselves more than others, live in isolation and things like that, we're acting less than human. That is not humanity fully alive, and it does not reflect the glory of God to the rest of creation. So, what do we do with all of this? I'm going to explore the different ways that the image of God impacts the way that we view and treat ourselves, others, and church. So let's first talk about the implications that it has on our view and treatment of ourselves. I think sometimes we can have a Hobby Lobby theology when it comes to being an image bearer, which is kind of like you have these cute signs that's like, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, but not really knowing what that means. And I don't mean to offend if you do have those decorations in your house. It's good stuff. But maybe someone has poor self-image, so you respond with, "You were made in God's image. You were fearfully and wonderfully made. Of course you're pretty." And it's just very shallow. I think the story of creation points to something much more dense than that. You are fearfully and wonderfully made as an image of God, made for a purpose to reveal God's glory to a beautiful yet hurting world. Romans 8:19 says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed." That can happen now. We get to do that. Theologians often call the creation story something along the lines of God's palace temple story, or I think Rick Watts calls it his cosmic temple story, or there's some kind of variation of that from different theologians. And that's because there's a lot of similarities between the story of creation and then the instructions for the creation of the temple in the Bible. And I think that highlights something really neat and special. In ancient Near East culture, which is the culture of the time of the Old Testament, the last thing that takes place in the creation of pagan temples is placing an idol or an image of the god who the temple belongs to. And then when the readers of the Old Testament were hearing these stories about God's creation, that would then remind them when they enter the temple of the presence of the God that they're worshiping. So in creation, God's cosmic palace temple, or whatever you want to call it, the last thing that happens is the creation and placement of humanity, images of our God. So what if in God's temple, he doesn't instruct the builders to bring in an idol of himself because his image was already represented there? What if he meant it when he said that humanity was created as his image? There's a lot of implications for that. I know plenty of people, and this is myself too, who have a hard time with their view of themselves. And I feel like a lot of my ministry revolves around reminding people of their worth and value and importance. I am constantly reminding people that they were made as images of God and they have immense value and worth. It matters what they do with their body because they're images of God. It matters how people treat them because they're images of God. It matters that they believe the truth about themselves because they are images of God. And the work that they do matters because they're images of God. And as God's image, we have the opportunity to represent God's divine presence to the world. I have a student at TCU whose name is Sierra, and she's been reaching out to this freshman and really wants her to know Jesus. And this other student doesn't have many friends, and she's struggled adjusting to college, and she isn't really interested in God right now. And this girl texted my friend Sierra and said that she got 100 on a quiz and really wanted to celebrate, but didn't know who to celebrate with. And so my friend Sierra went with her to go get ice cream to congratulate her and celebrate with her, which seems pretty simple, right? But then Sierra called me afterwards and was saying that she really wants to do meaningful ministry with this girl, but it feels like just going to get ice cream isn't enough. And I was like, no, Sierra, what you are doing is showing her that you care about all things, even the small things like grades in her life. And because you, Sierra, are an image of God, she has the opportunity that God cares about those things in her life. And because God has made us as his image, the things we do matter. They have meaning. Our life and our work has meaning because it is a big deal to act as God's representatives here. So if you're the kind of person who really struggles with self-worth or seeing value in yourself or your work, remember that the most true part of you is that you are made as an image of God, an image of the creator of the world. The image of God is central to your human identity. But with this innate value, there's also a great sense of responsibility and care that we must consider. The point of this sermon isn't just to inflate your sense of self-importance. Good leaders consider others above themselves. In our series on Mark, we were constantly asking, what does Jesus do with power? And just like Jesus, the truest human, our rule is to be benevolent, prioritizing the flourishing of those around us. Philippians 2:5-8 says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And this is what it means to be truly human, to live in alignment with our job as images of God. It isn't to just sit there and finally feel important, but to go be like Jesus to the people around us. So let's talk about how this idea affects our view and treatment of others. Just the other day, I was really stewing on this topic, and I was on a walk, and I was praying and thanking God for making all people as his image. And I was walking in a park across the street from our apartment, and I was just looking at the people there and was like, wow, God's image is everywhere. And I feel like this idea really and finally sunk in. I was looking at kids on the playground and saw the joy of God. Then I saw parents chasing the kids on the playground, and I saw the care of the Lord. And then I saw friends laughing and spending time together, and I saw the relational aspect of God. But then I see a woman who I often see at this park. She was wearing the same thing as last time, clearly experiencing some kind of homelessness, and I crossed the street so we wouldn't have to pass each other. And literally, as I was praying and thanking God for making everyone in his image, I chose to not see it in this woman. And I ignored the fact that the image of God is central to her identity, her human identity. So who is that for you? We all have people that we seem to forget are images of God. We see people who have different beliefs than us, and we think, how on earth do they think it's okay to act or believe or do this thing? What is wrong with them? And we view them as less than human. What if we see the people on the other side of the political spectrum as images of God? What if the people who have physical and intellectual disabilities are 100% images of God and haven't even lost a little bit? What if we believe that people who are different from us in every single way are images of God? And when we fully grasp the importance of this concept, it makes sense that the prophets have so much to say about how we treat people. Or it has more weight when Jesus says, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. Or even heavier when he says, whatever you don't do for the least of these, you don't do for me. And it is that big of a deal how we view and treat people. And if we believe that people are images of God, we would treat them with more dignity. We ought to encourage them to live as if they matter, even if the world says they don't. So again, who has the world convinced you isn't an image of God? Spend some time thinking about this and praying about this week. I'm going to read a quote from C.S. Lewis that I think nails this topic on the head. And it's a little long, so I have it on the screen for you guys to follow. It says, it is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses. To remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all only in a nightmare. All day long we are, in some degrees, helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and the circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all of our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. And when he's saying gods and goddesses, he's not talking about deities in the typical sense. Again, God alone is God. But instead, he's highlighting the glory of the role of being images of God. He's asking, when you're interacting with someone, are you going to affirm or deny their identity as an image of God? There is nothing in between here. And I love the part that says there are no ordinary people. He's saying if you met someone living in full alignment with their identity as an image of God, you would be tempted to worship them. The dullest, most uninteresting person you have met has been given the role to represent God's glory here on earth. And you have the opportunity to shape what they believe about themselves. So if I treated you as an image bearer with dignity and honor, I would hope that you would then go live with dignity and honor as God made you. But if I treated you less than human, what are you going to believe about yourself? How are you then going to go live your life? We get to shape people. And I think our church has played a big role in shaping the way that I viewed myself. As someone who feels like that I have to constantly impress, it was so freeing to be welcomed into this body before I even had the chance to try to be impressive. Very early on, people noticed if I was ever not at church, and they would reach out to me. I was invited to spend time with you guys and to make new friends, and people wanted to truly know me, and this brought dignity to me. I was treated as if I actually mattered, purely because I am an image of God, and I am very grateful for that. So who is God giving you the opportunity to shape this belief in? Is it your kids, friends, parents, students, people in your small group? This is not the kind of treatment that people have to earn. It's what we freely give because the image of God is central to their human identity. In all of our dealings, all of our interactions with people, we have the opportunity to see the image of God and encourage them to live in alignment with their calling. There's a New York Times columnist named David Brooks who was an atheist for most of his life and was actively denouncing God. And then when he was around 50, he said he was in the ugliest place in New York City, which is the subway station next to Penn Station. And it was crowded and it was crazy. And all of a sudden, Brooks said that he just realized, wow, all of these people around me matter. There's a piece of these people that gives them infinite matter and dignity. And that is how he became a Christian. He saw the value of all of God's people. And now he says that every time he meets a person, he knows he's staring at the face of God. And the glory is given straight to God, the Creator. It's not about us. It's all about God and his goodness. N.T. Wright says that as an image of God, we're kind of like an angled mirror that reflects God's wise order into the world and then reflect all of the praise back to God. And that has great implications for how we do church. So let's read a part of Isaiah 1 together in the Message translation. It says, "Quit your worship charades. I can't stand your trivial religious games, monthly conferences, weekly Sabbaths, special meetings. Meetings. I can't stand one more. Meetings for this, meetings for that. I hate them. You've worn me out. I'm sick of your religion, while you go right on sinning. When you put on your next prayer performance, I'll be looking the other way. No matter how long or loud or often you pray, I'll not be listening. And do you know why? Because you've been tearing people to pieces and your hands are bloody. Go home and wash up, clean up your act, sweep your lives clean of your evil doings so I don't have to look at them any longer. Say no to wrong, learn to do good, work for justice, help the down and out, stand up for the homeless, go to bat for the defenseless. And this is God speaking through Isaiah to his people, and it's very harsh. And it's because people are made in the image of God, not worship services. We could have every part of the service right, but if we don't know one another, see one another, or encourage one another, we're missing the point completely. We could be meeting in the perfect building that is built just for us, but if we aren't loving one another, we are missing the point. We could have flawless sermons, but if we do not carry one another's burdens, we are missing the point. So really think about the way you do church. Do you come in and get ready to worship and listen to a sermon and be filled and just try to leave as quickly as possible? Or just try to talk to the people that you want to talk to after church? Or belong to a small group that you are most comfortable in? Don't miss an opportunity here to be fully human. Even if that means you have to sacrifice something like your energy or comfort or preferences. When we only give God a small percentage of our lives and heart, we only get to experience small percentages of being truly human. So don't rob yourselves of that. When you are talking to any person in this room, it is no ordinary thing. You're interacting with someone who is God's image. A holy thing is happening. You get to be reminded of God's presence in the world, and we need all of the reminders we can get. So again, the point of understanding what the scriptures have to say about being human is not just to make us feel good about ourselves, but to redefine what it truly means to be human, to help you see the glory and responsibility that comes with being an image of God. And worship team, y'all can come back up. And this is also to give you hope and an excitement for what God is doing in the world. Again, the image of God is central to our identity as humans. And we've been given the opportunity to display God's goodness to the rest of the world, and that is a glorious task. So I'll pray for us. God, thank you so much for your brilliance and for creating us to be your image. And I ask that you help us see the goodness of that and see the freedom in that, and that we would go represent you to the rest of the world and give you glory for everything we do. In your name I pray, amen.